Chapter 31. Soon, Royal Air Force planes flew overhead in color, and terrified people fled into the jungle or dived into quickly dug trenches. Then the bombardment started, and falling bombs caught those in transit, like the man who lived on Pagoda Hill. He caught the full force of a bomb, which exploded near him, so that his intestines spewed out onto the road as he attempted to cross over to the other side. Dismembered limbs could be seen, devoid of the body, midst the ruins that remained of many of the houses in the area. For some, there were miraculous escapes, like Amma Jani, her husband, and their 9 children, who also lived on Pagoda Hill. For them, the terror began the day the oldest son, Muhammad, came home with news of a bomb attack, which he said was imminent. He had barely finished speaking when they heard the wail of a siren, followed by the rumble of approaching aircraft. Looking skyward, they saw several bombers flying in together. For a few seconds, people froze in the midst of their actions. The grandmother paused with a spoon in one hand and the lid of the pot in the other. It was like a magic spell had been cast on the town. Then suddenly, as if someone had snapped their fingers and released them from the spell, they were mobilized into rapid action as they dropped whatever they were doing and, rushing out, clambered into the trench behind the house, where the freshly dug earth lay like a newly opened grave. They had barely crouched down into the shelter when Ruqayya, the second oldest daughter, then a young teenager, noticed that Saijan, William nowadays, one of her younger brothers, was not there with them. Immediately rushing out of the trench, she ran back to see if he was still in the house. There she discovered him calmly sitting at the table, eating his lunch of dal ghosh, which he had hungrily helped himself to. Screaming at him, she grabbed him and, running back to the others, slipped quickly into the trench. As they pulled the fronds and branches across the opening above them, they heard the loud drone of the aeroplane almost directly overhead, followed by a high-pitched whine and then a deafening explosion as a bomb crashed within a few feet of their house. The grandmother, with sufficient presence of mind, quickly went into the kitchen to collect and take with her the food that she had earlier prepared for the family. As she did so, she glanced at the table where just a little while earlier Saijan had been eagerly satisfying his hunger. She was horrified to see how close to danger he had been, for in the plate from which he had been eating, there lay the shell of a machine gun. She grabbed the still hot pot off the stove and, trembling, rushed out to join the others as they ran towards the jungle. In the panic, Zara and Begum, the 2 younger daughters, ran in the opposite direction toward the Ponji town nearby. Here they were met by Dortin, the Burmese wife of a Sikh gentleman, well respected in the community. They knew her well and often played with her children. To their surprise, she waved her hands at them, saying, "Twaja, Twaja, go away, go away." Just then, the tall Pathan, Shahji, saw them running around crying, looking terrified and quite lost. So he picked up the younger girl, Zara, and carried her piggyback toward where the others were hiding. She clung to him as he made his way down the hill toward the rest of the family. Begum, who was scurrying behind them, felt she needed to be carried too. And just as Shahji reached the crest of the little valley, she leapt onto Shahji's back. Her unexpected weight tipped the balance, and all 3 of them went tumbling down to the bottom of the incline. Shahji picked the children up and, dusting the pine needles off their clothing, took them toward the rest of the family. Shaken, but with their bones intact, the little girls, with tear-stained faces and still sobbing, ran and, throwing their arms around their mother, clung to her. They remained in the jungle till the sound of bombs and aeroplanes ceased, and then returned home to find that it was now nothing more than a mass of rubble and shattered furniture. There was hardly anything worth retrieving, so they wandered down the hill toward the center of town, where they found more destruction. The only houses that still remained, mostly intact, were our house and that of the other prominent family, the Shirazis. So the Hussains decided to live in our home till my Chota Baji and his family arrived there after their failed attempt to trek to India. As the planes came in, flying low over the hills, naive children ran out excitedly to look at them. Parents quickly grabbed them and rushed to hide in trenches or in any spot that they considered might be safe. As soon as the sounds of exploding bombs and the rat-a-tat-tat of machine gun fire subsided, the children ran out to collect the spent shells. The plan to target Kolo on market day took a severe toll on the civilian population as bombs started falling and exploding, shattering the busy marketplace. People covered their ears, their eyes wide with fear, and prayed loudly to blot out the noise of the explosions and the sound of machine gun fire that followed. The Royal Air Force had targeted the Japanese army and succeeded mainly in killing hundreds of their own supporters, demolishing homes and scattering disembodied corpses and limbs all over the town. The bombers aimed for those houses nestled among the hills and in the center of the town, which, according to their information, harbored members of the Japanese army. All the buildings around our home crumbled, and one wall of our house either collapsed entirely or was partially damaged. Chota Baji, small father, my father's younger brother, who was literally too a smaller version of my father, renovated that wall. The family moved in to live in our house after they failed in their attempt to trek on foot northwestwards across the border to India via what was then Bengal. It didn't matter who rained down the bombs. They destroyed the houses all around, leaving only their skeletal remains. Strangely enough, none of the bombs remained unexploded. I wasn't sure whether the wall of our house that collapsed was the east wall or the west wall, the south or the north wall, points of the compass by which I pin my position today on this earth. But location didn't matter to me then, for as long as I was in Kolo, it was the center of the world, and each direction I looked was perfection. The sun did set, now that I think about it, early, sinking behind the hills, but then it also seemed to rise in the same place. Maybe the sun knew that its position on the horizon was irrelevant, where time itself stood back and observed or slept in the shady hollows and hidden valleys. And also in comparison to what those who attempted the trek to India had to endure. The entire social, economic, and political structure had been changed, broken, and splintered. The robotic machinations of war had performed well the code of destruct. Many of those who attempted to flee either died or survived but did not return. The few who did come back and those who stayed behind received no compensation for the losses they had incurred, nor did they contemplate it. People worked hard to rebuild their lives with that indomitable human spirit which is illustrated in similar situations throughout the history of mankind. I, of course, didn't remember any of my relatives who lived in Kolo, and to me it was like meeting my Zohra Kala, her husband, Akalu, and their 4 children, Choti, Rosie, Chota, Edwin, baby Gracie, and Nani, the small one, for the first time. We approached each other bashfully at first, but in no time became quite comfortable with each other, and soon we were visiting them often at my Nanima's Narangi Bagicha. We also met again our Uncle Ayub and all the mammies who had increased in number by the time we returned. Auntie Joan, who was the older sister of Ronnie Sweeney, had been wooed by my uncle during the war and was now added to my uncle's harem. Hers was a tragic story in that her husband, her brothers, including Ronnie, my brother Eunice's friend, and her parents had all died in the bombing, and she, together with her 3 children, had somehow survived. She became the 5th wife of my uncle, became my Auntie Joan, and for a while continued to live in a small bamboo house with a thatch roof, which had been built over the bombed out site of what had been the home of her husband and family on Kingswood Hill. Later, she moved into an annex built in the compound of the same house where my uncle and his other wives lived. On cold winter evenings, she would fill a huge enamel basin with firewood, and a warm fire would soon get started. The air would fill with smoke that would quickly dissipate, filtering upwards through the feathery fronds of the thatch roof. Her 3 children, Peter, a year or so older than I was, Victor, about the same age as my brother Farouk, and Dorothy, close in age to my younger sister Bilkis, became our cousins, and we often played together. Auntie Joan had this wonderful collection of jades, and she gave one each to my cousins Marina and Anne. They were the daughters of my other uncle, the one we called Big Uncle. When we saw those jades, we wanted to know why we had been excluded from this gift-giving, so Auntie Joan obliged us by giving us one each as well. The one I got was a beautiful brownish red and looked like a drop of strawberry jam, like the jam that Auntie Joan made. She made a lot of other things too, like guava cheese and guava jelly, chocolate fudge, crystallized ginger, dole, and vegetable pickle, which once tasted created lifelong cravings for them. I recall my cousin Rosie telling me how kind and generous Auntie Joan had been during the war to everyone, in spite of her own tragic experience. She shared whatever she had with others, no matter how small it was, dividing even a tiny bar of chocolate into small portions in such a way that no one was left without a piece. She also joined my mommies in the tailoring business and excelled as much as they did in turning out those finely stitched angies for her clientele. Chapter 33. We owned a 6-acre property off Circular Road that we simply called 14 Number, and we excitedly talked about plans to build a large house with a separate bedroom for each of us on it. In the meantime, my uncle Ayub came up with this marvelous idea for a sawmill, and down at the bottom of the hill, just below the edge of our property, he cut a small canal into the clayey soil and connected it to the Kalor stream. This newly cut channel of muddy water inspired my sister Dolly and myself to stitch together blue cotton fabric into what looked like bikinis, and which we considered suitable swimwear for splashing about. We wore these and had a lot of fun pretending to swim by supporting ourselves on our hands and lying on the surface of the water in the canal by kicking our feet. And then, to our embarrassment, my brother Farouk arrived with his friend Suleiman Rashid, and we quickly wrapped ourselves in towels and shyly walked away. It must have been during the summer holidays, because it was then that the folks from Rangoon would come up to Kalor. Mr. Rashid, or U Rashid as he was known, was a prominent politician and lawyer, a friend of my father's, who brought his wife and their 2 sons, Bilal and Suleiman, to Kalor for a vacation. I remember my brother Arthur and Bilal building interesting structures with the Meccano set, while Farouk got so attached to Suleiman that he cried when the holidays were over and they had to return to Rangoon. The canal channeled water from the Kalor stream to the giant saws that now spun round and round, sawing through large logs of pine. Supervising the operation were 1 or 2 of the mommies, depending on whose turn it was to be there. All the mommies were immaculate in their dress and smelt of sandalwood or some indescribable scent that implied cleanliness, simplicity, and sweetness. They always wore finely woven white cotton or nylon angies and darker colored longies with floral or other pattern designs on them. I always felt that Maria Mami was the most meticulous and dainty of them all. It was on the day that Maria Mami was to control the operation that it happened. Small of frame, she stood beside the rotating rollers, guiding the log on the track with her dainty hands as the log worked its way forward. The sun glinted off the jagged teeth of the sharp circular blades of steel, and a mist of fresh pine dust filled the air and settled on the floor and around the machinery. Mariam Mami loved the scent of resin and newly cut wood, and the whirring sound of the saw as it efficiently sliced through the logs gave her a sense of accomplishment, as if she herself was the saw, moving with swift and exacting motion through the timber. She inhaled deeply and then abruptly stepped back from the spinning blades, staring at her hand, which now had 3 fingers missing their tops, almost up to the first knuckle. In a state of shock, she held up the detached pieces and exclaimed that her fingers had been cut off. She was rushed to the hospital, but by the time she got there, the doctor said it was too late to reattach the fingers. She stoically endured the excruciating pain that followed, and once the wound healed, accepted her fate, adapted, and continued to produce exquisitely stitched clothing. Chapter 34. My sister Dolly and I planned a cookout of sorts with the then current railway doctor's daughter, Maya Hansraj, and my cousin Anne. Maya, who was a newcomer to Kalor, had arrived at Kingswood School when her father was transferred there as the new railway doctor. When I tried to impress her with how beautiful the flowers were in Kalor, and told her that we even had black roses, referring to the Black Prince, which was a variety of rose that was so deep a red that it was almost black, she boasted that she had green roses in the garden of the house up on Railway Hill where they had been given accommodation. I didn't believe her and had to check it out myself. I saw the variety of cactus-like plants growing in her garden close to the ground with swirls of rose petal-like formations, and then I conceded defeat, except that I wondered why the petals were so thick and why the leaves were so different. Only much later did I learn that they were, of course, not roses at all, but the rosettes of the succulent called Echeveria. Maya agreed to meet us on the morning of the planned picnic, and Anne said she would also be there. She was closest to our meeting point by the sawmill because she lived just up the hill in Kenoith, which was next door to our acreage at 14 Number. I can't imagine how we planned such things then without contacting each other by telephone, email, or cell phone, but messages seemed to have been delivered telepathically, like the news about anything discreet or indiscreet in the town. People just seemed to know rather quickly. We had communicated somehow because Rehanna, that's Dolly, and myself arrived in that little area by the canal at the foot of the hill beside the sawmill and waited for the others to arrive. We were each supposed to bring something to cook, so my sister and I took a few potatoes. Maya, who lived in the house on the hill above the railway station, brought a small bag of raw rice, while Anne, who lived just halfway up Mylone Town in Kenoith, up the hill from the sawmill, simply didn't show up. So we went ahead without her. We placed 3 large stones on the ground, leaving a space in the middle for the pieces of pine wood, which were plentiful around the sawmill, and once we struck a match, the resin in the twigs ignited easily. We filled water in the little metal pot my sister and I had brought along, and then put some of the raw rice into it. This was our first effort at cooking, and as soon as the water began to boil, we thought the rice was done and took it off the fire and laid it aside. Next, we cut the small potatoes into discs and fried them in a little oil. We then remembered that we had to drain the water from the rice the way we had seen Yasin do, but when we removed the lid, we saw that all the water had disappeared. We didn't indulge in a delicacy which was also available in the same area and which was enjoyed by some of the local shans. It certainly would have made up for the lack of nutritious balance in our meal. The tidbit in question was the protein acquired from a white, shrimp-sized larvae of some insect which lay curled inside a reddish-brown mud ball, and would not have been too difficult to find in that area since we had seen them there before. The taste of that pine smoke scented meal of fried potatoes and the slightly raw rice, which we hungrily devoured, can never be matched by the best chefs of the world's most famous gourmet restaurants.